TONI'S. On a seedy street in a part of town that has seen better days, the trio enters a hole-in-the-wall dive. There was a sign outside with burnt-out light bulbs and faded, chipped paint that advertised the place as TONI'S. Entering the establishment from the bright sunlight to the dark, gloomy interior, one had to stop and adjust their eyes. They entered a poorly lit hallway with old faded paneling and old-fashioned photographs from a different era. The photos were of groups of soldiers posing with their comrades that one sees from time to time, old faded memories of other times, different circumstances, different places. Jake started down the hallway without glancing at the walls, gunny in tow. Steve was slower, savoring the pictures, reading the unit names and looking at the signatures from past times. Steve stops in front of one image, black and white, faded, the unit name barely readable. Looking closer at the picture, Steve reaches out his hand to rub away years of grime and dust. Gunny calls out, "Quit lagging! Get over here!" Steve looks again at the picture, smirks, and walks into a familiar scene, inside a dimly lit room. There was a bar with dusty glasses and bottles, beer taps, and a stained, scratched bar top. The carpet was thin, stained, and moldy. Several tables with linoleum tops completed the room, each with 4 chrome and vinyl chairs. One aspect of this pub surprised Steve. It didn't smell like cigarettes. Strange. Jake and Gunny were already seated at a wobbly table that looked like it would collapse at any minute. Steve strolled through the empty pub and sat down, the chair creaking under his weight. Gunny said in a disgusted voice, "You eat here? I've been in latrines that were more sanitary than this place." From the far end of the bar, out of the dark, a gravelly voice calls out, "If you don't like it, get the fuck out." Gunny, caught off guard but not wanting to admit her rude behavior, shouts back, "Is that any way to treat a customer?" Out of the darkness, the silhouette of a massive figure emerges. "Customer, my ass! Get out, asshole!" Jake cuts in, "Tony, these are my guests. Please forgive her rudeness. Wolves raised her." Gunny glares at Jake. Steve chuckles. Then Gunny glares at Steve, who quickly shuts up. A colossal figure stepped out of the shadows. Gunny and Steve looked on in surprise. Was this a man? Tony, wearing stilettos, was as tall as Steve and similarly built, but that is where the similarities stopped. Tony has long blonde hair that goes to the middle of his back. A wig, a close-cut black beard with flecks of gray covered a ruggedly handsome face. What caught their attention was the tight sequined gown with the plunging neckline he wore, his hairy pecs exposed. Steve looked on in surprise and amusement. Gunny, her mouth hanging open, stared at the sight before her, dazed and muddle-headed. Tony looked at the drooling, dumbfounded Gunny. "What's wrong, sugar? Have these 130 kilos of steel and sex appeal caught your eye? If you're willing, you can come upstairs and see my art collection." An indignant Gunny returns to reality after hearing those words. "No," slowly drawled Gunny. "Get lost, you pervert. What woman in her right mind would find you attractive?" Jake said, "You'd be surprised. Tony's a babe magnet." Gunny gives Jake a disgusted look. "You're just as perverted as him." Jake chuckles. "I've known Tony for over 20 years. He's helped me out a lot in my younger years. I consider him a close friend. His lifestyle might differ from what you are used to, but did you ever think that you might be the strange one if you associated with his friends? Live and let live, I say." While Gunny and Jake were talking, Tony handed out menus. Gunny dropped the subject and glanced at the menu. "Does this place serve any healthy food?" Tony's brow furrowed, and he was about to say something when Jake butted in. "I've had enough of your bullshit, you little troll. I don't know what got your panties bunched up, but you don't insult my friends in their own house. One more snide, rude comment out of you, and I'll throw you out." An angry Gunny was about to dare Jake to throw her out when Steve said, "Gunny, look, SOS." In a flash, Gunny's demeanor changed, and she looked over Steve's shoulder. "Where? Where?" Steve winks at Jake and smiles while pointing at the menu. "Sausage gravy and biscuits." An excited Gunny said, "I'll have the SOS. No, make it 2. Tony looks at her, then starts writing down her order. 2 healthy salads for the lady. What else?" Jake and Steve break out laughing while Gunny frowns. Gunny was about to say something but looked at Jake only to see him staring intently at her. She closed her mouth and decided to keep quiet while also fuming. Steve looks at Jake. What do you suggest? Jake looks at Tony. The usual, ham and eggs, 2 eggs over easy, hash browns, and a big glass of milk. Steve hears what Jake ordered and nods. I'll have what he's having plus a full stack of pancakes and a serving of SOS. Everyone stares at Steve. What? I'm hungry and it's a free meal, right? Looking at Jake. You are buying, right? Jake smiles and gives him a thumbs up. Steve relaxes and leans back in his seat, an excited smile on his face. Tony said, I'll be back in 30. Then glides off to the kitchen. Gunny sees Tony stroll away and thinks, could I walk in stilettos that easily? What size are those damn shoes? Must be custom made. Now that's out of the way, let's get down to business. Jake looks at Steve. I think you know who I am? Steve said, Jacob Stanley, owner of Q Science, inventor of the Stanley generator, and the world's richest person. Am I close? Gunny looks at Jake in amazement. You're rich? That's what they tell me. You make it sound grander than it is. By the way, my friends call me Jake. Glad to meet you, Jake. Do you know anything about me? I know you have a hot-headed sister who's a war hero. You are a disgraced officer kicked out of the military. Gunny angrily interrupts. He's innocent. He's a scapegoat to cover up the incompetence of those higher up in the chain of command. Sis, I was tried by a jury of my peers and found guilty. What I did was wrong, and I have accepted my punishment. They just kicked me out. They could have given me prison time. I suppose they thought they were doing me a favor. Besides, some of my troopers died. Which do you think Mr. and Mrs. Wachowski would rather have? Their son or a Medal of Valor? Gunny pouts. Still, you saved all those people. You did the right thing. I wish I could have done more. People under my command died. I need to accept responsibility for it. Jake speaks up. I'm not here to judge right or wrong. I do believe Steve did the right thing given the circumstances. Q Science is always looking for intelligent, conscientious people willing to do the right thing even if it harms them. MBAs are a dime a dozen. We're looking for leaders. Gunny butts in. Are you offering him a job? How much? Steve speaks up. Hold on, sis. We hardly know this guy. He hasn't offered me a job. Plus, if it is a job offer, what's the job? Excitedly, Gunny said, who cares what the job is? If it pays enough, I'd even sleep with him. Jake's face sours. There are better prostitutes out there than you. Even I have standards. Realizing what she just said, Gunny tucks her head down and blushes in shame. Steve looks at Jake. Just what do you know about me? Jake starts reading off a list of Steve's accomplishments. Star athlete, top in your high school class. Accepted into the academy where you majored in electrical engineering, emphasizing neural networks, 4th in your class at graduation. After graduating from the academy, you volunteered for infantry training, though you had your pick of jobs. Graduated 1st in your class at infantry training. Had several overseas deployments before your unfortunate encounter. Your first and only actual combat saw you court-martialed. Gunny glared at him. That last one was a low blow. Jake continued. That's a general summary that you find in any CV, except for the last one. Here's what else I know. You could have graduated 1st in your class. But having such a high profile would kill your chances to go into the infantry. You chose the infantry so you could be with your sister. Being 1st in your infantry class gave you the first choice in assignments, and you selected your sister's unit. Gunny looked at Steve. Is that true? Our parents died just before Sis graduated. She gave up a scholarship and joined the service to take care of me. She would put her life on the line taking combat deployments so she could get combat pay to send home. What would you do given the situation? Jake sat back in his chair, a look of disdain on his face. Let me get this straight. You both handicapped your futures to help the other? You two deserve each other. Steve and Gunny looked at each other, bitter smiles on their faces. Suppose each had been a little selfish in their decision-making. Things might have been different. However, there is no medicine for regret. Steve asks Jake, where did you get all this information? We haven't met before, and it was just a coincidence we ran into each other today. With a smug look on his face, Jake said, don't underestimate Q Science. We are a premier company with unlimited resources. Our human resources department is second to none when it comes to vetting potential employees. Are you in touch with HR as we speak? I don't see an earpiece or comm unit. Join my company as my adjutant, and you will know all my secrets. Why me? We have reliable information that I might be in danger. I'm not looking for a bodyguard, but I want someone around me who can take care of themselves if the shit hits the fan. I'll have enough problems taking care of myself, much less someone who panics and wets themselves at the slightest danger. Thanks for your concern, said Steve sarcastically. Not at all, said Jake, seemingly oblivious to Steve's sarcasm. Jake adds, by the way, did I mention that the job pays $500,000 a year? Steve and Gunny sit bolt upright in their chairs. Gunny was excited. Steve is suspicious. Just how dangerous is this job? It shouldn't be that dangerous. We will be at the compound most of the time. I will be going to a congressional hearing in the next couple of weeks. If there is any danger, it would be when we travel. Q-Science has plenty of resources, and there shouldn't be any surprises. The main threat is kidnapping. There hasn't been an assassination attempt in over a decade. There's no money in killing me. Jake's nonchalance surprised Steve. You don't seem too worried. It's part of the job. There haven't been any attempts in years. Today was a wake-up call. I've grown complacent. According to our intelligence, there is an increased chance that something will happen in the next year. Steve looks at Gunny, who nods in the affirmative. Looking at Jake and tilting his head towards Gunny, what about her? Jake looks at Gunny, sitting across from him with an excited look on her face. Jake sighs. I suppose it's a package deal. Gunny looked indignant, but kept her mouth shut for once. What abilities do you have other than beating the shit out of people who make you angry? I don't mean to be cliché, but I don't think you are good at stereotypical tasks like cleaning, cooking, and washing. I also don't care if you can pick off a sniper at 500 meters with a slingshot. Gunny pauses for a moment in thought. I've taken several community college courses, basic carpentry, basic electricity, and basic plumbing. I thought they might come in handy after I retire. Jake nods. I'll give you $100,000 as a groundskeeper. You'll be a gardener, handywoman. Keep the grass mowed and do general repairs. Gunny makes a sour face. How come he gets $500,000 and I only get $100,000? Jake answers back in a stern voice. Because I want him. I don't want you. Think of it as $100,000 bonus to Steve to keep him from refusing. Do you think $100,000 is the going rate for an entry-level maintenance worker? I don't need your charity. $200,000. Okay, I'm in. You can't take it back. You heard what was said, Steve. An embarrassed Steve smirks and remains quiet. Jake, I know you're rich, but this is just throwing away money. Why don't you just go to the homeless shelter and hand out money? Jake perks up. We don't do that? Take care of that, would you, Hobart? Hobart sighs. Me and my big mouth. I'm on it, boss. Gunny was happy and excited. They both had jobs and good-paying ones at that. She looks at Steve. We have to find a place to stay and buy some transportation. Also, we need... At that point, Jake interrupts her. You'll be staying at the compound. There are plenty of vehicles there to use. Anything you need that is within reason, we will provide it. Steve said, That's a little overboard, isn't it? You think so? I offer this to all my employees. I'm not altruistic here. I'm buying loyalty. Our company's employee retention rate is over 99%. It's not 100% because sometimes people die. However, we did have one fellow quit because he had an idea and wanted to start his own company. We gave him a grub stake and even invested in his company. Have you heard of the company Infinite Memory? Of course, they invented multidimensional memory for computers. They used your theory of infinite dimensions to create computer memory that expands across dimensions, giving unlimited computer storage and computational memory. Just so that you know, that gentleman retired, and Q-Science bought his company only to sell it again at a substantial loss. See, we take care of our ex-employees also. At that time, Tony arrives with an enormous platter balanced in his meaty hand. Using one hand to hold the platter, he started serving the dishes. He placed Jake's and Steve's orders in front of them first. Gunny looked at the food in front of them and started drooling. Noticing Steve's SOS, her stomach growled loudly. She looked at Tony in anticipation, then remembered that she had 2 salads. Her shoulders slumped dejectedly. "And 2 salads for the lady," said Tony while placing 2 SOS in front of her. Gunny was stunned for a moment while everybody laughed. Recovering quickly, Gunny dug into her SOS. Manners be damned. Gunny relaxed and thought about what had just happened. After leaving the service, she worried about how they would survive. Many veterans face this dilemma, most successfully, but some fail. The transition can be stressful even in the best circumstances, but the task looked insurmountable with Steve's dishonorable discharge. Then a chance encounter with an eccentric rich man changed everything. Is this fate? While enthusiastically shoveling ham and eggs into his mouth, "Do you two need time before you come to the compound?" Gunny, a little bit of gravy on the tip of her nose. "Nah, we just blew into town an hour ago. Our duffel bags are in a locker at the bus station. We just need to pick them up and we will be ready to go." Steve had already finished the ham, eggs, and hash browns and plowed through the pancakes, just grunted and continued enjoying his breakfast. Tony bent over and whispered in Jake's ear, "You got some real winners here." Jake thought for a moment. Hobart, was he being sarcastic? "No, he's serious. I agree with him. I believe these two will be a great help to you from now on. Of course, they'll never replace me. They do have something useful that you don't have." "And what could that be?" "Hands," chuckled Jake. "That will change in the future," thought Hobart. After finishing their excellent breakfast and coffee afterward, Jake got up and walked to the exit. Steve speaks up, nodding toward the table. "Didn't you forget something?" Jake looks at the table. "Oh, right." He then grabs a toothpick from the dispenser. "Thanks, I forgot." A confused Steve sighs, reaching into his pocket, pulling out a couple of low-denomination credits. All his savings. Jake sees this and understands, "Oh, that. Don't worry, I have a running tab here. Besides, Tony and I are partners." Gunny and Steve look at each other and think, the richest person in the world is partnered with some guy who runs a dive. What kind of relationship do they have? Walking down the hallway to the exit, Steve stops in front of the picture he looked at earlier. Licking his fingers, he rubs years of dust off the glass. The photo was of a group of soldiers posing for the camera. While they looked relaxed while smiling in front of the camera, their eyes told a different story. They had the eyes of survivors, relief, despair, and guilt. Two people stood out in the image. One was a large, burly sergeant whose name tag on his chest read Martin. In front and below him, lost in the camouflage of everyone's uniforms, was a petite private looking up at the sergeant, a big smile on her face. Her name tag read Stewart. Steve wonders, looking down the hallway. "Should I tell Sis?" He smirks, shakes his head, and follows the others out into the bright sunlight.